The man who walked out of the woods that morning wasn't the same man who'd vanished 5 years earlier. His skin was pale, his hair matted, and his voice trembled when he whispered, "They're still in there." Deputies thought he was delirious, until he showed them the scars. Small, perfect cuts running down his neck in the shape of symbols no one could trace. He said his brother was dead, that something else had taken his place. And when investigators followed his directions into the Bitterroot forest, they didn't just find a camp, they found a pit. The same pit where the missing were taught that pain was purity, and that fire could cleanse the soul. Sunday morning, November 9th, 2015. The sun was barely up over the quiet streets of Helena, Montana, when Ethan McCarthy slammed the tailgate of his old silver Chevy shut. The truck bed was packed tight tents, gear, rifles, propane tanks, and 2 weeks of canned food. His younger brother Ryan stood by, tightening the straps on his weathered hunting pack. The two men looked almost identical, tall, broad-shouldered, with that same McCarthy jawline, but the years had changed them. Ethan, 39, was steady, quiet, a mechanic at a local auto shop. Ryan, 36, restless and searching, had been laid off from his warehouse job 2 weeks earlier. For the McCarthys, the woods weren't just escape, they were inheritance. Their father had raised them to hunt elk in the Bitterroot Mountains, the same trails he'd walked back in the 72nds. Every November, without fail, they made the trip north, a silent pact between brothers. That morning, Ethan's wife, Laura, stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching them load up. They'd been married 4 years, but had spent the last 2 trying and failing to have a child. Laura smiled when Ethan promised, "Back by Friday. Don't worry." He texted her one last time as the truck pulled onto Highway 93, disappearing into the frost. The drive took 7 hours from open plains to narrow, twisting forest roads. The weather was clear. No snow yet. Just that sharp November chill in the air. They stopped for gas in a small town called Ravalli, bought sandwiches, a few maps, and an extra box of batteries. The cashier remembered them, 2 brothers laughing, talking about how good the season looked. Ethan paid with a card. Ryan grabbed 2 cups of coffee, and they left around 2:15 p.m. That was the last confirmed sighting. By late afternoon, they'd turned off onto Forest Road 217, a dirt track cutting deep into the Bitterroots. Cell service faded within minutes. At 4:42 p.m., Ethan texted Laura one last message. "Just hit the trail. See you soon." After that, radio silence. When Tuesday came and neither brother showed up for work, Laura started to worry. She called Ethan's phone. Straight to voicemail. She called Ryan's apartment. No answer. By Wednesday morning, panic set in. At 9 a.m., she filed a missing persons report with the Helena Police Department. By that evening, a joint search team, Flathead County deputies, rangers, and volunteers, was dispatched to Bitterroot National Forest. They found the McCarthy's Chevy Silverado less than a mile from their usual campsite near Elk Creek Basin. The truck was locked, keys on the seat. Inside were their wallets, licenses, and $340 in cash. Both rifles were stored properly behind the seats, not a single sign of struggle. Behind the truck, the ground told a calm story: boot prints leading into the woods, and back again. Nothing broken, no drag marks. Whoever left had done so willingly. Search teams combed the area for 12 days. Helicopters scanned the tree canopy. Dogs traced a scent trail for nearly half a mile before losing it near a ridge of black rock. The only other clue was a small campfire pit, cold but clean, found 2 kilometers away. The ashes were mixed with animal bones, deer or elk. No one could tell. A ranger noted something odd. The fire ring was built with stacked stones, perfectly symmetrical, more like a ritual hearth than a hunter's camp. Nearby, they found a single shoe print, smaller, lighter, not matching either brother. Then the snow came. The search was called off after the 15th day. Winter sealed the forest shut. 3 months later, in early spring, volunteer groups returned when the snow began to thaw. They found nothing new. No remains, no clothing, no broken gear. It was as if the forest had simply erased them. Insurance eventually declared the McCarthy brothers deceased. Laura, after years of silence, moved south to Arizona. The parents, too old to keep searching, stopped speaking of it. By 2019, the case file was cold, buried in the back shelf of Flathead County's records room. Until February 3, 2020, when the front door of Missoula Police Department swung open. A man stepped in barefoot, wearing a torn jacket and jeans soaked to the knee. His hair was long, his face covered in scars, his eyes sunken but alive. He walked to the front desk, trembling. "My name is Ethan McCarthy," he said quietly. "I think I've been gone for 5 years." The officer at the desk didn't move for several seconds. He'd heard of the McCarthy case, who hadn't? 2 brothers vanish. No trace. But this man, he couldn't be the same Ethan. Then Ethan said something that froze the room. He named the exact date they vanished, the campsite location, and a word no one outside the family ever knew. The nickname their father used for their hunting spot. Little Ridge. That was when they called the sheriff. Within an hour, the station was filled with investigators, cameras, and paramedics. Ethan's weight was 118 pounds, almost 50 less than before. His hands were covered in fresh burn scars. He flinched at every sudden noise. When the nurse touched his shoulder, he whispered, "Don't let them hear us." For 2 days, Ethan refused to talk. He barely ate, barely slept. But on the 3rd night, sitting alone in a dim hospital room, he finally began to speak. And what he told them, what he remembered from the forest, was unlike anything anyone had ever heard before. The room was dim, lit only by the hum of a single lamp above the bed. Ethan McCarthy sat hunched over, hands shaking, eyes fixed on the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost hollow. "It started the first night," he said. "After we set up camp. He and Ryan had built a fire, cooked from a can, talked about work, and laughed about old hunts. At around 11, they crawled into their tents, the forest whispering outside. Ethan remembered drifting off to the sound of the creek nearby. Then, a flash of light. Not lightning, a beam, white and silent, cutting straight through the tent fabric. Someone was standing outside. He whispered Ryan's name, but before he could unzip the tent, something hard struck the side of his head. He fell, half conscious, feeling rough hands drag him through dirt and pine needles. A bag went over his head. He could hear Ryan shouting and then silence. Ethan said they walked for hours, ropes around their wrists, boots stumbling over rocks. The air turned colder, thinner, the smell of smoke somewhere ahead. When the bags were pulled off, the 2 brothers were no longer alone. They were in a pit 6 feet deep, surrounded by high dirt walls. 2 other men sat there, filthy, hollow-eyed, their faces ghostly pale. The first, older, muttered nonsense about atonement. The second, a kid maybe 20, didn't speak at all. Both were shaking uncontrollably, as if they hadn't slept in days. Above them, shadows moved, men wearing tattered coats and masks made from animal hides. Their eyes glowed faintly in the firelight. One voice, deep and deliberate, spoke. "Welcome to the fold. The shepherd has found you." Ethan paused, his breath trembling. The detective across the table asked what the fold meant. Ethan's answer was simple. They thought civilization was a disease. They called themselves the shepherd's flock. Their leader, a man with gray hair and a voice like gravel, called himself the shepherd. No real name, no history. He wore a necklace of carved bone and always carried a wooden staff tipped with metal. The others followed him like he was God. Ethan said, "They said the world outside had already burned, that we were the last who could be cleansed." The captives were given new names. Ethan became Ash. Ryan was called Reed. The others were known only as Stone and Pine. Each morning began with a chant, low, rhythmic, echoing through the trees. What is given must be broken. What is broken must be burned. They were fed almost nothing water from streams, roots, sometimes raw meat. The pit became their home for weeks. They weren't allowed to speak except during purification. The shepherd believed pain stripped away sin. Every day, he made them kneel in the freezing creek until their lips turned blue. At night, he ordered them to stand still before the fire, holding stones until their hands bled. Ethan's voice cracked. "We thought it was some twisted game, but they meant every word." Months passed, maybe more. Time blurred. The cult had no clocks, no sunlight beyond the narrow view from the pit. Once, Ethan tried counting days by the meals they received. He stopped when the pattern broke. The other prisoners disappeared one by one. When the older man, Stone, refused to join a ritual, they dragged him out at dawn. The next morning, they returned his clothes neatly folded without his body. They said he'd been purified, Ethan whispered. But I heard him screaming until it stopped. Ryan began to plan escape. He whispered to Ethan at night, swearing they could take one of the guards during a storm, steal his knife, and run for the ridge. Ethan begged him to wait. We didn't know how many there were, or what direction the road even was, but Ryan didn't wait. One foggy morning, while the cult was out hunting. He climbed the pit wall using a loose branch and vanished into the trees. For a full day, Ethan believed he'd made it. Then they brought him back, dragged, bleeding, eyes swollen shut. The shepherd stood before the fire and said, "The forest rejects the faithless." They tied Ryan to a tree. Every member, men and women, stepped forward, one by one, throwing stones. Ethan screamed until his throat tore, but they held him down. When it was over, the shepherd laid a hand on his shoulder. "Now you are cleansed through his sacrifice," he said. Ethan stared at the detective now, silent tears carving paths through the dirt on his face. He said they buried Ryan in a swampy patch behind the camp, marked with an antler stuck in the mud. After that, something in him broke. "I stopped fighting," Ethan said. He began obeying every command, bowing his head, chanting the lines. He mimicked belief until even the shepherd began to trust him. They moved him out of the pit, made him carry water, chop wood, clean their makeshift shelters. He learned their routines when they hunted, when they slept, where they kept their traps. The camp itself was deep within a gorge, hidden by pine and stone. Homemade huts lined the edges of a clearing, and in the center stood the altar, a circle of boulders, blackened by countless fires. Around the perimeter hung their masks, deer skulls, wolf hides, hollow eyes staring from the branches. Ethan said the cult wasn't just surviving, they were waiting. The shepherd preached about a second storm that would sweep away the rest of mankind. They were to remain pure until that day came. He believed pain brought clarity. Ethan murmured. He said I was close to enlightenment. That soon, I'd hear the voice of the earth. By the third year, Ethan had stopped counting. He said winter came and went, each one colder than the last. Once, a woman named Mara, one of the followers, secretly gave him half a loaf of bread. She whispered, "He wasn't always like this. He used to be a soldier." Ethan never saw her again. Then came the hunt. It was late January, snow deep and wet. They'd tracked a massive boar across the valley, using spears and bows. The animal turned on them fast and furious. It gored one of the men through the leg and vanished into the thicket. Chaos erupted. Screams, blood, snow flying everywhere. In that moment, Ethan ran. No plan, no direction, just the primal instinct to move. He tore through branches, his feet numb and bleeding. Behind him, he heard shouting, the shepherd's voice echoing like thunder. Then, silence. For days, Ethan stumbled through the forest, surviving on snow and bark. He followed the stars, heading west, praying he was going somewhere, anywhere. His hands froze, his breath burned, but he didn't stop. On the fourth day, he saw a dirt road, a single tire track cutting through the snow. He collapsed beside it, too weak to call for help. A logging truck found him the next morning. At the police station, Ethan's words came slower, like the story was draining the life from him. The detectives asked if he could lead them back to the camp. He nodded weakly. "I can find it," he said, "if it's still there." But when asked why he hadn't come sooner, he only whispered, "Because I thought they'd still be watching." "Me," he said. Some nights, even now, he could hear the chant faint, somewhere in the back of his skull. What is given must be broken. What is broken must be burned. By dawn, his story was on every major channel in Montana. Reporters crowded outside the station. The sheriff announced a full-scale search, with 40 officers and 2 helicopters ready to sweep the forest. As they left the room, Ethan sat alone, staring at his reflection in the dark window. The light caught the side of his neck, faint scars forming a pattern of small cuts, almost like symbols. No one noticed it yet, but when they did, the question wouldn't be what had happened in the forest. It would be what Ethan had brought back with him. The morning after Ethan's confession, the Bitterroot Valley looked calm, snow melting under a gray February sky. But behind the trees, dozens of armed officers were gearing up. The mission was clear. Find the camp he'd described, the pit, the masks, and the man called the shepherd. Ethan rode in the back of a Forest Service truck, wrapped in a thick coat. His eyes flicked from tree to tree, as if searching for faces that weren't there. Every shadow made him flinch. 2 helicopters circled overhead. K-9 units moved ahead, their breath steaming in the cold air. The forest, silent for years, was about to reveal its secrets. At noon, they reached a narrow gorge. Ethan pointed at the slope. "There," he whispered. "Past those rocks." The air changed thicker, colder, as if untouched since he'd left. They found the first sign 2 hours later. A ring of stones, blackened by fire. In the ashes, fragments of animal bones. And something else. A human tooth. The dogs picked up a scent and led them deeper through twisted pines. Each step felt heavier, slower. Then came the smell: rot, smoke, and old blood. A clearing opened suddenly, surrounded by cliffs. In the center stood what was left of the shepherd's camp. Collapsed shelters, scattered bones, masks dangling from tree limbs, hollow eyes staring down. The pit was still there, covered with leaves but unmistakable. When the search team peeled back the surface, they found scraps of fabric, rusted chains, and a metal cup etched with the word, ash. Ethan froze. "That was mine," he said. His voice was barely audible. The team called for forensic units. Photographs, measurements, samples, every inch catalogued. But what they found next stopped everyone cold. 50 yards beyond the clearing lay a shallow swamp. The ground was soft, sunken in the middle, marked by an old antler. The same symbol Ethan had mentioned. They began to dig. 5 feet down, they struck fabric, a torn jacket sleeve. Inside, bones. Human. Dental records confirmed what Ethan already knew. Ryan McCarthy. The same brother he'd watched die under that crimson sky. The same man who'd shared his last meal by the fire 5 years ago. The official report said blunt trauma to the skull. But the forensic examiner added one quiet note: multiple impact points consistent with ritualized stoning. Ethan refused to see the remains. He sat apart, hands over his face, whispering the same line over and over. He just wanted to go home. Within days, news cameras flooded Missoula. Headlines called it the Bitterroot Cult. Every major network wanted Ethan's story, but he refused interviews. He stayed under police protection as investigators widened their search. If the camp had been active for years, there had to be more people, maybe even more victims. The first lead came from a town 50 miles west, in Libby, Montana. A grocery store clerk reported a man trying to steal canned food. He carried a handmade knife and wore a necklace of bone fragments. When questioned, he gave the name Tom Hale. A quick check showed that Tom Hale had died in a fire 10 years earlier. The sheriff drove up personally. When they pressed him, the man finally said something that chilled the room. "The shepherd sent us into the valley to wait for the cleansing. We never left." And Len nodding, "Gozing Denery." He described 3 others still alive, 2 men and 1 woman hiding across Montana. The woman worked under a false name at a roadside motel in Kalispell. The other lived in an abandoned trapper's hut near Flathead Lake. The arrest of the woman came quietly. She was cleaning rooms when they arrived, calm, detached, wearing a bracelet made of woven animal sinew. When asked her name, she smiled. "You can call me Mara." The same woman who had once given Ethan a piece of bread, but the shepherd was different. He was the ghost they couldn't catch. Ethan told them his name once slipped out. Owen Frost, a former Army medic discharged for severe behavioral instability. Count. There were old assault charges, but no fixed address. Frost had spent years drifting through forests in Idaho, Oregon, and Montana. Each place he stayed, reports of missing hikers followed. He'd built a belief system, half survivalism, half delusion, centered on purification through pain. The manhunt lasted 3 months. Tips came from truckers, park rangers, even hunters who claimed to hear chanting deep at night. Finally, in early June, a ranger near Cobalt Mine reported smoke rising from an abandoned shaft. A tactical team moved in before dawn. They found Frost alone, unwashed, bearded, eyes wild. He resisted, lunging with a spear carved from rebar. A single shot ended the fight. He fell, bleeding, still shouting prayers. When they searched his den, they found journals, dozens of them, each page filled with tight, frantic handwriting, plans, rituals, maps. One note read, "Ash has seen the fire, he carries the mark. He will return when the world is ready." Ethan's name again, repeated across several pages. At the station, detectives laid the journals in front of Ethan. He didn't touch them. He just stared at the words like they were still alive. The sheriff asked what the mark meant. Ethan hesitated. Then he rolled up his sleeve. Small cuts formed faint lines across his skin, not random, but patterned, intersecting. The same marks found carved into Frost's staff. Ethan said he hadn't noticed them until after his escape. He swore he hadn't made them. That night, a deputy standing guard outside Ethan's room reported hearing something. A low voice, almost a whisper, repeating from behind the door. "What is given must be broken. What is broken must be burned." When they entered, Ethan was asleep. hands pressed tightly over his ears. He said he dreamed of a fire that never went out. By summer, the story dominated national headlines. The shepherd's flock brought to justice. The trial began in January the following year. Ethan testified, voice steady, recounting every day of captivity. He identified Mara and the man called Hale. He described Frost's sermons, the pit, the cleansing rituals. The courtroom stayed silent, every word falling like a hammer. Forensic evidence confirmed his account: the pit, the bones, the masks. The defense tried to argue insanity, but the psychiatric evaluations were clear. They knew exactly what they were doing. The verdict came after 3 months. Mara and Hale 30 years each. Frost life without parole. When the judge read the sentence, Frost laughed. "You can't kill what's already pure," he said, before being dragged away. Ethan didn't react. He just stared straight ahead, his eyes fixed on something no one else could see. After the trial, Ethan vanished from the public eye. He moved south, near a small farm in Wyoming. Neighbors said he kept to himself, tending to horses, avoiding crowds. At night, they sometimes heard him talking softly to no one. One winter morning, a rancher passing by saw something strange on Ethan's barn wall. A crude drawing, burned into the wood, a circle of stones with fire in the middle. And beneath it, 4 words carved deep: "The shepherd still watches." When questioned, Ethan only said he didn't remember doing it. He looked tired, older, hollowed out. But as he turned away, sunlight caught the side of his neck. The scars there, faint, pale, glimmered like a brand. Investigators later reviewed Frost's last entries. One line stood out: "Purity is not a place. It's a man who returns." Ethan never gave another interview. He stopped answering calls from the sheriff's office, from the media, from anyone who tried to reach him. And in the mountains where the flock once lived, hikers still report strange things: circles of stones, fresh ashes, animal bones arranged in perfect symmetry. No footprints, no names, just the forest, watching. Snow fell over the Wyoming plains like ash. 3 years had passed since the trial, yet Ethan McCarthy still woke at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, clutching the scar on his arm. He'd built a life of silence, a cabin, a few horses, miles from anyone who might ask questions. Locals said he was polite, but distant. He'd shop once a month, speak little, pay cash. Sometimes kids in town would whisper that the man with the scars used to live in the woods. He never corrected them. At night, he'd sit on the porch, staring into the horizon, the dark shape of the Bitterroot Mountains far in the distance. He told himself the past was gone, but the wind still carried whispers. In March 2023, the new owner of Frost's Diaries, an investigative journalist named Claire Redding, drove up to see him. She had spent 2 years writing a book about the case, but she said something in the last pages didn't match the official records. Ethan hesitated to let her in. Then she mentioned a date, November 9th, 2015, and he froze. That was the day everything began. Claire laid a folder on the table. Inside were photographs taken from Frost's mine hideout. Among the sketches of rituals and symbols was one page labeled, "The Second Shepherd." The handwriting matched Frost's. The drawing was of a man with scars down his neck standing before a fire. Beneath it, "He carries the mark and walks among them." Ethan's face went pale. He whispered, "That's not real." But his hands trembled as he touched the page. Claire said the FBI believed Frost had planned a second gathering, a rebirth for his followers, but no other members had ever been found. Only evidence of recent fires deep in the forest, arranged in perfect circles. Ethan said quietly, "He used to say the flame never dies, it just waits for someone to feed it." 2 nights later, the wind howled across the valley. Ethan woke to the smell of smoke. He stepped outside and saw orange flickers on the hills, distant but real. He grabbed his jacket, jumped into his truck, and drove toward the ridge. The forest loomed again, familiar and wrong. The snow melted beneath the heat. When he reached the edge of the woods, he saw it, a ring of stones glowing red, fire still burning. Beside it, footprints bare, small, almost childlike. He called the sheriff. By the time deputies arrived, the fire had gone cold. The footprints were gone too, covered by wind and ash. The sheriff asked if he'd made the fire himself. Ethan shook his head. "I haven't built a fire since Montana." He didn't mention the whisper he'd heard when he arrived, a voice from the dark. "Ash returns to flame." Weeks passed. Claire's book released nationwide, titled The Shepherd's Shadow. It climbed to the top of every bestseller list, reopening the story Ethan wanted buried. Reporters began showing up again, filming his property from the road. He ignored them until one morning, he found a small bundle left by his gate. Inside, a crude wooden charm shaped like an eye, wrapped in deer hide. Attached was a note, "For the shepherds chosen." Ethan burned it immediately. But the smell, the same mix of sap and rot, stayed on his hands all night. He dreamed of the pit again, of the firelight flickering on masked faces, and always, the shepherd's voice whispering, "What is broken must be burned." When he woke, his porch was covered in fresh snow, but someone had drawn a circle in it perfectly even, centered beneath his window. By summer, the FBI reopened the case. 2 hikers had gone missing near Cobalt Mine, the same area where Frost was found years ago. Their abandoned campsite showed signs of struggle, torn canvas, boot prints, and a burned log ringed by stones. Ethan was called in for questioning, not as a suspect but as someone who might recognize patterns. He sat in the same interrogation room where he'd once told his story. Everything felt smaller now, like the walls were listening. Agents asked if he thought anyone could have rebuilt the cult. He hesitated. "They don't rebuild," he said. "They wait. They pass the fire from one to another, as otters." He told them the shepherd used to say purity was not a man but a memory. Maybe someone out there still believed it. Maybe they'd never stopped. A week later, Claire went missing. Her rental car was found near Flathead Lake, door open, keys still inside. On the passenger seat lay her notebook, half burned. The last line she'd written, "He doesn't remember what he's become." The news spread fast, then faded faster. The case went cold, just like Ethan's once had. He didn't speak to police again, but neighbors began noticing changes. Late at night, they saw light flickering in his barn, orange and rhythmic, like firelight. Sometimes they heard chanting. One said it sounded like Latin, another swore it was English, repeating a single phrase. When deputies checked, they found nothing. No candles, no fire pit, just the smell of smoke clinging to the wood. In October, a mail carrier discovered Ethan's truck abandoned on a dirt road near the Wind River Range. Inside were canned food, a hunting knife, and a single page torn from a journal, written in charcoal. "He spoke through me. I finally understand." A week later, hikers found a small clearing a mile from where the truck was parked. There were fresh ashes, bones of small animals, and on one tree a mask. It was made of hide, crudely stitched, with one half burned black. No human remains were found, but at the center of the circle lay Ethan's wedding ring, blackened by fire. Authorities called it a disappearance. The media called it the last flame. The FBI quietly closed the file after 6 months, citing lack of evidence of foul play. But not everyone agreed. A retired ranger swore he saw a man one night near the ridge, tall, scarred, carrying a wooden staff capped with metal. When he called out, the figure turned and smiled, then vanished into the trees. He described the same words Frost had carved into his staff years earlier. "Purity is fire made flesh." Thanks for watching. Today, hikers still find traces near the Bitterroot Forest, perfectly arranged stone circles, burnt animal bones, symbols carved into bark. Each time, investigators record them, destroy them, move on, yet they always return. Locals say the forest hums on certain nights, a sound like wind but deeper, almost human. Hunters swear they hear footsteps when no one's there, and if you stand long enough near Holland Ridge, you can smell the faintest trace of smoke. Maybe it's memory, maybe it's something older. One thing is certain, the shepherd's flock is gone, but the fire, the one Ethan carried home, never went out.